At 11:47 p.m., the hospital chapel was almost empty, except for one exhausted single mother sitting in the last pew. Rebecca Clark pressed an old silver ring against her trembling palm, tears slipping silently down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I don't know who you belong to, but I promised I'd find your way home." The chapel door creaked open. A tall man in a dark suit froze the instant he saw the ring glint beneath the candlelight. His face drained of color. It was the ring his late mother had worn every day of her life until the day she died. In a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "Where did you get my mother's ring?" Before we uncover what really brought these two strangers together, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. If stories about courage, kindness, and second chances speak to your heart, we'd love to have you join our community by subscribing. Every weekday began at exactly 4:45 a.m. for Rebecca Clark, long before the first hint of sunlight reached the streets of Cleveland. Her alarm was never loud. It played a soft piano melody that her 8-year-old son Caleb had once described as the sound of morning trying not to wake the stars. Rebecca had never found the heart to change it. She slipped quietly from the worn sofa that doubled as her bed in the small, one-bedroom apartment. Caleb had the bedroom. She insisted on that, even though the springs in the old sofa had long ago surrendered, and reminded her every morning where they pressed against her back. The apartment sat above a neighborhood laundromat whose dryers hummed late into the night. The building smelled faintly of detergent mixed with aging wood, but Rebecca kept their home spotless. The tiny kitchen table always held a fresh dish towel. Caleb's school drawings covered one wall. A second-hand bookshelf displayed library books, arranged as neatly as expensive decorations. She believed dignity lived in the little things people chose to do when no one was watching. Before anything else, she checked Caleb's breathing. The boy slept curled beneath a faded blue blanket covered with tiny rockets. His chest rose and fell steadily, though every breath carried the slight whistle that had become heartbreakingly familiar over the years. His congenital heart condition had taught Rebecca to notice details most parents never thought about. The color of his lips, the rhythm of his breathing, how quickly he became tired climbing stairs, whether he smiled with his whole face or only half of it. She gently touched his forehead. Still cool, still peaceful. "Thank you," she whispered, not to anyone in particular, but simply because this morning had begun with another ordinary miracle. Coffee came next. Not the expensive kind advertised on television, just a small plastic container bought on sale every other Friday. Rebecca measured exactly 1 scoop each morning, never more. She smiled as the aroma filled the apartment. "Best coffee in Cleveland," she joked quietly to herself. The joke was old. No one ever heard it except her. At 5:20, Caleb slowly opened his eyes. "You already made coffee." "I couldn't let the world's greatest customer wake up disappointed," he laughed. "You only have one customer." "And he tips with hugs." He climbed off the bed, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his head against her shoulder. Everything else suddenly felt lighter. While oatmeal simmered on the stove, Caleb looked at the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. Another red circle. Another hospital appointment. He counted silently. "There are 17 days." Rebecca nodded. 17. "Mom." She already knew the question before he asked it. "Everything will be okay." Rebecca looked into his eyes and smiled with far more confidence than she actually possessed. "We keep showing up." Those 4 words had become their promise, not because life was easy, because quitting had never been an option, After breakfast, she helped Caleb pack his backpack. His lunch was simple: a peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, a small handwritten note folded inside the lunch bag. Every day she wrote something different. Today it read, "You are braver than you know." She kissed his forehead before the school bus arrived. Watching it disappear down the street had become one of the loneliest moments of every day. Rebecca drove to St. Matthew Medical Center in a 12-year-old silver Honda Civic whose dashboard displayed more warning lights than she cared to count. She patted the steering wheel. Just one more week. She had been saying that for almost 2 years. The employee parking garage was nearly full when she arrived for her 12-hour shift. Officially, she worked as a certified nursing assistant. Unofficially, she became whatever patients needed. Someone to bring extra blankets, someone to hold trembling hands before surgery, someone to brush an elderly woman's hair because no visitors had come, someone to read birthday cards aloud when failing eyesight made the words impossible to see, someone who remembered names instead of room numbers. Her co-workers often joked that Rebecca somehow added extra hours to every shift. The truth was simpler. She couldn't walk away from people who looked frightened. By mid-morning, she had already helped a veteran suffering from early dementia find his wedding photograph calmed a frightened child before an MRI, and spent 10 extra minutes listening to an elderly widow describe the husband she'd lost 23 years earlier. None of those moments appeared on her timesheet. Yet somehow they always felt like the most important part of the job. Around 2:15 p.m., an ambulance arrived carrying an elderly woman from a smaller regional hospital. The woman was unconscious. No family accompanied her. Her chart listed only the name Eleanor Davis and several chronic medical conditions. Rebecca noticed immediately how carefully folded the woman's belongings were inside a clear plastic hospital bag. Whoever packed them had taken great care. Inside were reading glasses, a faded handkerchief embroidered with tiny blue flowers, an old paperback Bible, a worn leather wallet containing only $37, no jewelry, no valuables. Rebecca carefully inventoried every item before transferring the bag to the temporary belongings cabinet. The woman remained at St. Matthew only a few hours before another transfer was arranged to a long-term specialty facility in another county. The transport team departed in a hurry. Another emergency had arrived. Rebecca finished assisting with paperwork nearly 40 minutes later. As she returned to clean the now empty room, something caught her eye beneath the visitor chair. A tiny glimmer. She bent down. An old silver ring. Simple. Elegant. Its surface carried years of gentle wear. Not flashy, not expensive looking. Just loved. She turned it over. Inside the band were carefully engraved words. Always leave with empty hands, full heart. Rebecca read them twice, then a third time. The sentence settled somewhere deep inside her. She slipped the ring into a small evidence envelope and immediately carried it to the lost and found office. The clerk examined the transfer paperwork. No jewelry listed. Rebecca frowned. Maybe they forgot. Happens. Can we contact the receiving facility? We'll try. The clerk entered several notes into the computer. Rebecca hesitated before leaving. Please don't let this disappear. The woman behind the counter smiled kindly. We'll do our best. But something about the answer didn't reassure her. Over the next several days, Rebecca checked every break. No updates. No family had called. No transfer hospital reported a missing ring. The patient record itself had almost no emergency contact information. It was as if the owner had quietly vanished. One afternoon, Rebecca asked Walter Hayes, the elderly janitor who had worked at St. Matthew for over 3 decades, whether he had ever seen a ring with those words engraved inside. Walter adjusted his glasses. No. He paused. But those words sound like something worth living by. Rebecca nodded. I keep thinking someone must be searching for it. Walter smiled gently. Sometimes people spend years looking for the wrong things. She looked again at the sealed envelope resting in the lost and found drawer. For reasons she couldn't explain, the ring no longer felt like forgotten property. It felt like an unfinished promise. That evening, after another exhausting shift, Rebecca stopped outside the office one last time. She signed the temporary custody log, intending only to photograph the engraving so she could post a notice on local missing property boards during her own time. As she held the ring beneath the hallway lights, the silver reflected softly across her fingers. The inscription caught her eye once more. Always leave with empty hands. Full heart. Rebecca closed her hand around it for only a second before carefully placing it back into its envelope. I don't know who lost you, she whispered. But somebody's waiting. At that moment, she made a quiet decision that would alter far more lives than her own. If the hospital couldn't find the owner, she would, no matter how long it took. On the 42nd floor of Whitmore Medical Technologies headquarters in downtown Cleveland, every wall reflected success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lake Erie. Awards from international healthcare organizations lined polished shelves. Framed magazine covers celebrated innovation billion-dollar acquisitions, and the man many business journals called the quiet architect of modern medicine. Daniel Whitmore rarely looked at any of them. At 6:30 every morning, his driver stopped in front of the glass tower. Daniel entered through the private elevator, greeted the security officers by name, and disappeared into meetings that stretched from sunrise until long after sunset. His calendar was planned in 5-minute increments. His assistants knew he preferred silence over small talk. His investors admired his discipline. His employees respected his fairness. Yet very few people knew what happened after he returned home every evening. Instead of entertaining guests or celebrating another profitable quarter, Daniel drove himself to a quiet brick house in the suburbs, a house that had remained almost exactly as it was 3 years earlier, the day his mother died. Nothing inside had changed. The blue rocking chair still sat beside the fireplace. The kitchen curtains remained the same faded floral pattern Eleanor Whitmore had sewn by hand almost 20 years before. A half-finished crossword puzzle rested beneath a ceramic mug in the breakfast nook, protected under a sheet of glass, exactly where she had left it. Daniel dusted the furniture himself every Saturday. He refused to hire anyone. Some people visited graves. He visited memories. His mother's bedroom remained untouched. Every shirt in the closet still hung in perfect order. Her reading glasses rested on the nightstand beside an old devotional book with folded pages. Even the lavender scent tucked into the dresser drawers had long since faded, but Daniel imagined he could still smell it every time he opened them. People often assumed grief became easier with time. Daniel knew better. Grief simply learned to speak more quietly. At 7:15 that morning, his executive assistant, Olivia Bennett, entered the conference room carrying a stack of reports. The Boston investors confirmed for Thursday. Daniel nodded. The FDA review board moved next week's meeting to Monday. Fine. The pediatric partnership in Chicago wants another presentation. Schedule it. Olivia hesitated. There is one personal matter. Daniel looked up. You have dinner with your sister tomorrow. He closed the folder in front of him. I'll cancel. You've canceled the last 3. I know. Olivia didn't argue. Everyone who worked closely with Daniel understood one unspoken rule. Never mention Eleanor Whitmore for longer than necessary, not because he became angry, because he disappeared. His eyes drifted somewhere no one else could follow. By noon, the board meeting was underway. Charts filled giant screens, revenue projections, research grants, hospital partnerships. The directors applauded another record-breaking year. Someone joked that Daniel probably worked harder than the machines his company manufactured. He smiled politely, but inside he heard another voice, a warm one. "You can count profits all day, Danny." His mother always called him Danny. "But don't forget to count people." As a child, he never understood what she meant. As an adult, he wasn't sure he had. The meeting ended with another standing ovation. Daniel slipped away before anyone could congratulate him. Instead of joining the executives for lunch, he drove across town to Greenlawn Cemetery. Every month, the third Wednesday, exactly 1:00 p.m., no exceptions. Fresh white lilies, never roses. His mother had once laughed and said roses tried too hard to impress everyone. "Lilies just bloom," she had told him. He placed the bouquet beside the granite headstone. Eleanor Whitmore, 1948, 2023. Beloved mother. She lived so others could breathe easier. Daniel stood in silence. "I signed another children's hospital partnership today." The wind answered, "I think you would have liked it." More silence. "I still wasn't there." Those 4 words escaped almost involuntarily. He repeated them every month. "I still wasn't there." 3 years earlier, Daniel had been in Zurich negotiating the largest acquisition in company history. His mother had insisted he go. "It's only routine observation," she'd said over the phone. "I'll be home before you know it." She never came home. An unexpected stroke, complications. By the time Daniel landed back in Ohio, she had already been gone for 6 hours. His last conversation with her lasted less than 90 seconds. He still remembered every word. "Did you eat today?" That had been her first question. Not whether the deal was successful, not whether the investors were happy, whether her son had eaten lunch. Daniel had laughed. "You always ask that." "Because you're always forgetting." "I promise I'll eat." "Good. I'll see you Friday." "I love you, Danny." "I love you too, Mom." Those had been the last words they ever exchanged. No dramatic farewell, no final advice, just ordinary love. Sometimes that hurt the most. As he turned to leave the cemetery, his phone vibrated. Olivia. "I'm sorry to interrupt." "It's all right. I received a call from St. Matthew Medical Center." Daniel stopped walking. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. "What about?" "They're updating records connected to your mother's volunteer history." He frowned. "Volunteer history?" "Apparently there are several archived files they're organizing." Daniel smiled faintly. Even after death, his mother continued leaving surprises. "She never told us much." Olivia continued carefully. "There was something else." Daniel waited. "They asked whether your family was still searching for Eleanor Whitmore's silver ring." His heart skipped. For several seconds, he forgot to breathe. "What did you say?" "I told them yes." His voice became almost a whisper. "Did they find it?" "They didn't confirm." "They only asked whether the family wanted to be contacted if new information appeared." Daniel stared at the headstone again. The ring. He hadn't seen it since the day of the funeral. Police reports had been filed. Hospital staff had searched. His family assumed it had disappeared during the chaos surrounding Eleanor's final hours. Insurance investigators estimated its financial value. None of them understood why Daniel kept searching. The ring wasn't valuable because of diamonds. There weren't any. It was plain silver, worn smooth after decades. Its true worth couldn't be measured. Daniel remembered being 10 years old, sitting beside his mother on the front porch after scraping his knee. She had twisted the ring absent-mindedly while bandaging him. "One day this will belong to you." He smiled through tears. "Really?" She laughed softly. "Maybe. You don't sound sure." "I'm sure about loving you." She kissed his forehead. "But I'm not sure people are supposed to own everything forever." He hadn't understood then. Years later, when she occasionally returned home without the ring, Daniel asked where it had gone. She would only smile. It was needed somewhere. Then a few days later, the ring would mysteriously appear back on her finger. He assumed she had sent it for cleaning. He never questioned it again. Now, standing in the cemetery with the autumn wind rustling through the trees, those memories suddenly felt different. "What exactly did the hospital say?" he asked. Olivia checked her notes. "They requested that if contacted, you come personally." Daniel's grip tightened around the phone. "I'll go." "They didn't schedule a time." "I'll go anyway." He ended the call without another word. For the first time in 3 years, hope slipped quietly into a place grief had occupied alone. That evening, Daniel skipped 2 investor dinners and drove toward St. Matthew Medical Center. The city lights blurred beyond his windshield as questions crowded his mind. Had someone stolen the ring and finally decided to return it? Had it been misplaced in storage? Why would the hospital contact him now, after all this time? He couldn't have known that only a few floors above the emergency entrance, a tired, single mother named Rebecca Clark had already begun changing the course of his life. Nor could he have imagined that the next time he saw his mother's ring, it wouldn't be resting inside a display case or evidence bag. It would be clutched tightly in the trembling hands of a woman praying for her son's life. Rebecca Clark had never imagined that a piece of silver small enough to disappear inside her palm could become heavier than the rent notice folded inside her purse. The following Monday began with another long shift, another rushed breakfast, and another promise to Caleb that she would be home before bedtime. She missed that promise by 3 hours. An elderly patient suffered respiratory distress just as Rebecca was preparing to clock out. She stayed without being asked, helping stabilize the frightened man until his daughter arrived from nearly 2 hours away. When her supervisor apologized for the delay, Rebecca simply smiled. He needed someone. Driving home after midnight, she noticed the gas gauge hovering just above empty. She pulled into a neighborhood station and stared at the pump for several seconds. $32. That was what it would cost to fill the tank. She reached into her wallet. $21.14. She quietly selected $10 instead. "That should get us through Thursday," she whispered. Every decision had become a calculation. Gas or groceries, medicine or electricity, laundry this week or next. She had become frighteningly good at mental arithmetic. The next morning, while Caleb finished his cereal, he looked unusually quiet. Rebecca recognized that look immediately. "What are you thinking?" He hesitated. "Mrs. Turner said everyone in class is bringing their parents to career day." Rebecca smiled. "I'll be there." "You might be working." "I already requested the morning off." "You did." "I wouldn't miss it." He grinned. "Can you wear your blue scrubs?" "You want everyone to know your mom cleans up messy situations?" "You help people." Rebecca laughed softly. "I do my best." Caleb looked at her with the serious expression that only children somehow managed. "You help people even when nobody sees." She blinked. "Who told you that?" "I did." The school bus pulled away a few minutes later, leaving Rebecca standing on the sidewalk, longer than usual. Sometimes she wondered if children noticed truths adults spent years overlooking. At St. Matthew Medical Center, her first stop wasn't the nurse's station. It was the lost and found office. The same gray filing cabinet, the same metal counter, the same sealed envelope. The clerk recognized her immediately. "You're back." "Any updates?" The woman shook her head. "No family inquiries." "No calls?" "Nothing." Rebecca looked at the envelope. "May I see it again?" After signing the custody log, she carefully opened the evidence pouch. Morning sunlight streamed through the office window and landed across the silver ring. It looked ordinary. No gemstones, no elaborate design. Just years of gentle wear that had softened every edge. She slowly turned it over. "Always leave with empty hands, full heart." She traced the words with her thumb. "What do you think it means?" she asked. The clerk shrugged. Maybe someone's favorite quote. Rebecca wasn't convinced. "It feels personal." She carefully returned the ring to its envelope. As she walked toward the elevator, the inscription remained fixed in her mind. Empty hands. Full heart. The words followed her through the entire shift. Around noon, she overheard two nurses discussing rising medical costs. "My cousin sold her grandmother's jewelry." What choice did she have? Her husband needed treatment. Rebecca unconsciously touched the pocket where she'd carried the custody receipt. For just a moment, an impossible thought crossed her mind. What if no one ever came? What if the owner had already passed away? What if the ring simply stayed forgotten forever? She immediately pushed the idea away. Someone had loved that ring. Someone deserved the chance to reclaim it. 3 days later, another envelope appeared in her mailbox at home. She recognized the logo before opening it. St. Matthew Medical Center. Inside was an updated estimate for Caleb's surgery. Insurance adjustments, additional testing, unexpected surgical supplies. The new total exceeded the previous estimate by nearly $18,000. Rebecca sat silently at the kitchen table. The apartment seemed unusually quiet. Even the refrigerator's constant humming faded beneath the pounding in her ears. She reached for a notebook where she tracked every expense: rent, utilities, school lunches, medication, gasoline. The numbers refused to cooperate. She erased, added again, subtracted, started over. Nothing changed. She was still thousands of dollars short. That evening, Caleb found her staring at the notebook. "You forgot dinner." Rebecca quickly smiled. "I was just thinking." "You think too much." He walked over carrying 2 grilled cheese sandwiches. One looked slightly more burned than the other. "I made these." "You cooked." "I watched the video you saved." Rebecca laughed despite herself. "You've become quite the chef." "I only burned one side." She hugged him tightly. "What was that for?" "For reminding me what's important." Later that night, after Caleb had gone to bed, Rebecca opened the hospital estimate again. Her eyes drifted toward the lost and found receipt tucked inside her planner. She remembered something one of her co-workers had said. That old ring could be worth tens of thousands, enough to pay for surgery, enough to erase months of fear, enough to breathe again. The next afternoon, curiosity finally overcame her, not because she wanted to sell it, because she needed to know what temptation actually looked like. After work, she drove to a respected antique jewelry shop nearly 40 minutes away. The owner, an elderly jeweler named Arthur Collins, adjusted his magnifying loupe as Rebecca carefully placed the ring on a velvet cloth. "I don't own it," she immediately explained. "I'm only trying to identify it." Arthur nodded. He examined the ring in complete silence. He weighed it, studied the engraving, inspected the inside with a microscope. Nearly 10 minutes passed before he finally looked up. "Where did this come from? I really can't say." He leaned back. "This isn't valuable because of the silver." Rebecca waited. "It was handcrafted." He pointed toward a nearly invisible maker's mark. "Custom work. Old. Probably 40 years. He looked at her carefully. "If this has documented ownership..." He wrote a number on a small piece of paper. Rebecca unfolded it. $42,000. She stared at the figure. "I think you've made a mistake." "I haven't." Her breathing slowed. $42,000. More than enough. Not only for Caleb's surgery, it could eliminate nearly every debt she carried. Arthur noticed the change in her expression. "If you're interested, I know collectors who would pay immediately." Rebecca didn't answer. They'd ask no questions. They'd ask very few. The sentence unsettled her. Arthur slid the ring gently back toward her. "I've been doing this 48 years. He smiled kindly. "People usually walk in already knowing whether they're selling." Rebecca closed her fingers around the ring. "I never planned to." But now, she looked at the inscription once more. "Always leave with empty hands, full heart." The words felt strangely alive, as though someone had anticipated this exact moment decades earlier. Arthur quietly waited. Rebecca imagined Caleb lying in a hospital bed. She imagined handing the billing office a cashier's check. She imagined sleeping through one entire night without wondering which bill would go unpaid. Then another image appeared. An elderly woman searching everywhere for the ring she'd treasured for decades. Perhaps someone else's mother. Perhaps someone else's final memory. Rebecca slowly stood. "I'm sorry." Arthur smiled. "For what?" "I can't sell something that isn't mine." He nodded as though he'd expected that answer all along. "You know," he said gently, "I've watched many people leave this shop with expensive jewelry." Rebecca looked at him. "Very few leave with their integrity." She thanked him and walked towards the door. Outside, cold autumn air greeted her. She climbed into her aging Honda, but didn't start the engine. Instead, she held the ring one final time before sealing it back inside its evidence envelope. "I don't know who you are," she whispered to its unknown owner, "but if losing this hurts even half as much as losing hope..." She smiled through gathering tears. "I'm going to keep looking." Unbeknownst to Rebecca, only a few miles away, Daniel Whitmore was driving toward St. Matthew Medical Center after receiving news that someone might finally know what had happened to his mother's missing ring. Their lives were moving steadily toward the same place. Neither of them yet understood that the meeting waiting ahead would begin not with gratitude, but with suspicion. 17 days before Caleb's surgery became 16, then 15. Rebecca crossed each number off the kitchen calendar with a blue marker, forcing herself to believe that moving closer to the operation also meant moving closer to hope. But hope became increasingly difficult to hold as Caleb's energy faded. On Thursday afternoon, his teacher called. "He became short of breath walking back from the library," she explained gently. "The school nurse thinks you should take him to the hospital." Rebecca was already grabbing her keys before the call ended. By the time she reached St. Matthew Medical Center, Caleb's cheeks had lost their usual color. He tried to smile as nurses connected monitors to his small body. "I'm okay, Mom." "I know you are. You always say that." "Because it's true." Dr. Samuel Brooks entered the room carrying fresh test results. "I want to keep Caleb overnight." Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. "Is something worse?" "Not worse," he answered carefully. "But his heart is working harder than we'd like. I don't want to take unnecessary chances." Rebecca nodded. She trusted Dr. Brooks completely. Still, another overnight stay meant more bills, more paperwork, more hours away from work. After Caleb finally drifted to sleep that evening, Rebecca quietly stepped into the hallway. The pediatric wing had grown unusually still. Only the distant beeping of monitors and the soft squeak of nurses' shoes echoed through the corridor. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. For weeks she had remained strong because Caleb needed strength more than fear. Tonight the strength felt dangerously thin. Her phone buzzed. A notification from her bank. Current balance $186.42. Rebecca stared at the screen. Rent would be withdrawn in 4 days. She slipped the phone back into her pocket before tears could form. At the nurse's station, one of her co-workers offered her a sandwich from the cafeteria. "You haven't eaten all day." Rebecca smiled gratefully. "You should keep it." "You always say that?" "I'm all right." She wasn't, but pretending had become another daily responsibility. Near 10:30 p.m., she quietly left Caleb sleeping under the watch of the night nurses. Instead of going to the cafeteria, she followed a hallway she had walked hundreds of times while working at the hospital. Tonight, she wasn't an employee. She was simply a mother looking for somewhere private to breathe. The chapel sat at the end of a quiet corridor beneath a stained glass window depicting a sunrise. The wooden door stood slightly open. Rebecca stepped inside. Only a handful of candles burned near the altar. Soft, instrumental music drifted almost imperceptibly through hidden speakers. She chose the last pew, always the last. It allowed other families their privacy. She folded her hands together. For several minutes she couldn't find words. She simply listened to the silence. Finally, she reached into her purse. The evidence envelope. She had signed it out earlier that afternoon after another unsuccessful attempt to identify the ring's owner through updated transfer records. Tomorrow morning she planned to return it to Lost and Found again. She carefully removed the silver ring. The engraving reflected candlelight. "Always leave with empty hands, full heart." Rebecca turned it slowly between her fingers. "I wish I knew who you belong to," she whispered. "If your family is looking for you. I'm trying." A tear landed softly on the silver. "I'm just so tired." She wasn't talking to the ring anymore. She was talking to God. "I'm trying to do everything the right way." Her voice trembled. "I don't want shortcuts." Another tear followed. "I don't want to become someone Caleb wouldn't recognize." She covered her face. "But I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending I'm not scared." For the first time since Caleb's diagnosis years earlier, Rebecca allowed herself to cry without holding anything back. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the quiet exhaustion of someone who had carried too much for too long. At that exact moment, the chapel door opened. Daniel Whitmore stepped inside, carrying a bouquet of fresh white lilies. Every year on the anniversary of his mother's passing, he visited 3 places: her grave, the volunteer office, the chapel where she had often prayed before beginning her shifts. He expected the room to be empty. Instead, he saw a woman sitting alone in the last pew. He was about to leave without disturbing her. Then candlelight caught something in her hands, a silver ring. Daniel froze. His heartbeat became suddenly loud in his own ears. Impossible. He took one slow step forward. The engraving, the worn edges, the tiny scratch near the lower band that he remembered from childhood after accidentally dropping it on a stone walkway. There could be no mistake. It was his mother's ring. For several seconds, he simply stared. 3 years of unanswered questions collided with the sight before him. His grief, his guilt, his endless searching. All of it narrowed to one impossible image. A complete stranger holding the last object his mother had treasured. Rebecca sensed someone behind her and quickly wiped her eyes. She turned. A tall man in a tailored charcoal coat stood only a few feet away. She immediately recognized him. Not personally. From newspapers, business magazines, hospital fundraising events, Daniel Whitmore. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched painfully. Finally, Daniel's voice emerged low and controlled. "Where did you get that ring?" Rebecca stood slowly. "I'm sorry." The ring. His eyes never left her hand. "Where did you get it?" Rebecca instinctively closed her fingers around it. "I found it." Daniel's expression hardened. "Found it. It was left behind after. My mother wore that ring every day for 40 years. Rebecca blinked. "Your mother—" Daniel stepped closer. "That ring disappeared the night she died." His words landed like stones. Rebecca suddenly understood. This wasn't just jewelry. This was someone's final memory. "I've been trying to find the owner." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So you've had it this whole time?" "No." "I don't believe you." Rebecca felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. "I work here. I know exactly where you work. I reported it. Then why is it in your hand instead of hospital storage?" Before Rebecca could answer, Daniel reached into his pocket and pressed a button on his phone. Within moments, Marcus Reed, the night security supervisor, appeared at the chapel entrance. Daniel never raised his voice. He simply looked at Marcus and said, "I believe this woman needs to explain how she came into possession of my late mother's ring." Rebecca stood motionless, the silver ring still resting in her trembling palm, realizing that the act of honesty she had protected for weeks had suddenly become the strongest evidence against her. Marcus Reed had worked hospital security for nearly 12 years, long enough to know that appearances often lied. He had escorted grieving families who later donated millions to children's programs. He had also removed well-dressed visitors caught stealing medication from unattended rooms. Experience had taught him one rule: listen before judging. He looked from Daniel Whitmore to Rebecca Clark. One stood perfectly composed in an expensive wool coat. The other wore wrinkled blue scrubs after nearly 16 hours at the hospital, her eyes still swollen from crying. Yet Marcus refused to decide who was right simply by looking. "Miss Clark," he said calmly, "would you come with us to the administrative office?" Rebecca nodded. "I will." She carefully placed the ring back into the evidence envelope before anyone asked. "I don't want anyone thinking I'm trying to hide it." Daniel noticed the gesture, but said nothing. The three of them walked quietly through nearly empty corridors. Rebecca felt dozens of memories rushing through her mind. Every patient she had comforted, every extra shift she had accepted, every wallet she had returned. None of those moments seemed to matter now. To Daniel, she was simply the woman holding his mother's missing ring. Inside a small conference room near the security office, Marcus closed the door. "Let's start from the beginning." Rebecca placed the sealed envelope gently on the table. "I found the ring 18 days ago." Daniel immediately interrupted. "Where?" "In room 514. Marcus raised a hand. "Please let her finish." Rebecca took a slow breath. An elderly woman was transferred from another facility. After she left, I cleaned the room. The ring was under the visitor's chair. She explained every step, inventorying the patient's belongings, discovering the ring, taking it directly to Lost and Found, signing the custody forms, checking repeatedly for updates, borrowing it only to read the engraving and search for its owner. She omitted nothing, even the visit to the antique jeweler. When she finished, the room fell silent. Daniel leaned forward. If everything you said is true, it is. Then why wasn't my family contacted immediately? Rebecca looked toward Marcus. I don't know. Marcus opened the hospital's electronic property system. The record appeared almost instantly. Lost item, silver ring, found by Rebecca Clark. Temporary property ID, LF 78241. Date entered. Time entered. Employee signature. Marcus frowned. It was logged. Daniel stepped closer. What about family notification? Marcus scrolled. No next of kin information attached. Rebecca spoke quietly. The transfer paperwork was incomplete. Daniel's expression shifted ever so slightly. Not to trust, but uncertainty. Marcus continued searching. The receiving facility never updated the patient's emergency contacts. So no one knew whose ring it was? Daniel asked. It appears not. Rebecca felt the tension ease only slightly. Then Daniel asked another question. Why did you remove it from storage today? Rebecca answered honestly. I signed it out? Marcus looked up. For what purpose? I wanted better photographs of the engraving. Daniel frowned. Why? So I could post online notices after work. Marcus looked toward her. Did you? Rebecca unlocked her phone. She opened several community groups, neighborhood lost and found pages, hospital volunteer forums, local historical jewelry boards. Each contained the same photograph, the ring, the engraving, a simple caption, looking for the owner of this sentimental silver ring found at St. Matthew Medical Center. Ownership verification required. Daniel silently read every post. The earliest had been uploaded nearly 2 weeks earlier. There were dozens. None had produced an answer. Marcus slowly nodded. That's, consistent. Daniel remained quiet. He still wasn't convinced. You could have created those after finding out who I was. Rebecca looked directly at him. I didn't know who you were until 10 minutes ago. The answer carried no anger, only exhaustion. At that moment, another voice interrupted. I can confirm that. Pastor Grace Mitchell stepped into the doorway. Marcus looked surprised. Pastor? She smiled gently. The night receptionist called when she heard there was confusion involving Rebecca. Grace had served as the hospital chaplain for almost 15 years. She knew nearly everyone, especially the employees who quietly cared for others. She looked at Daniel. I've seen Rebecca pray in that chapel many nights. Daniel remained silent. Grace continued. Never for herself. Rebecca lowered her eyes. Grace smiled sadly. Always for patients. She turned toward Marcus. 3 months ago, Rebecca spent her entire lunch break sitting beside a dying veteran because he was afraid to be alone. Marcus nodded. I remember. Last winter, she organized coats for families sleeping in their cars while children were hospitalized. Daniel listened carefully. Grace wasn't finished. She doesn't advertise these things. Rebecca looked uncomfortable. Pastor, Grace gently raised a hand. I'm not trying to embarrass you. She turned back to Daniel. I'm trying to tell you who she is. Daniel crossed his arms. Good people can still make desperate choices. Rebecca answered before Grace could. You're right. Everyone looked at her. I thought about selling it. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Marcus looked surprised. Rebecca swallowed. My son needs heart surgery. She reached into her purse. Instead of bills or medical records, she removed the folded paper Arthur Collins had given her. The estimate, $42,000. I asked a jeweler what it was worth. Daniel stared at the number. You considered it? Yes. The honesty filled the room. Marcus didn't interrupt. Rebecca continued quietly. I even held the offer in my hands. What changed your mind? She looked down at the ring, the words inside. Always leave with empty hands, full heart. I couldn't explain why. Her voice shook slightly, but they made me feel like someone had trusted the next person who found this ring. She smiled faintly through tired eyes. I couldn't betray someone I'd never even met. Silence returned. Longer this time. Daniel looked at Rebecca differently now, not with trust, but with confusion. She had admitted temptation instead of pretending perfection. Most people would have hidden that part. Marcus finally broke the silence. I'd like to verify one more thing. He picked up the office phone. Could someone from Lost and Found come to conference room 3? Less than 5 minutes later, Linda Chavez, the overnight property clerk, entered carrying several binders. She immediately recognized Rebecca. Oh. Then she noticed Daniel. Her expression changed. Marcus asked only one question. Who logged the Whitmore ring? Linda answered without hesitation. Rebecca Clark. What happened afterward? Linda opened the binder. She came back almost every day asking if we'd located the owner. Daniel looked toward Rebecca. Linda continued. I actually told her to stop worrying so much. She laughed softly. I said, most people would have forgotten about it by now. Rebecca smiled faintly. I remember. Linda nodded. But she wouldn't let it go. Daniel slowly lowered his gaze toward the silver ring resting quietly inside its evidence envelope. For the first time since entering the chapel, certainty slipped away. If Rebecca had wanted to steal it, why had she spent nearly 3 weeks trying to give it back? Daniel Whitmore didn't sleep that night. He drove home long after midnight with the silver ring resting inside a temporary evidence case on the passenger seat, exactly where Marcus insisted it remain until the hospital completed its internal review. Rebecca had not been accused. Neither had she been cleared. The investigation would continue in the morning, yet Daniel found himself thinking less about the ring and more about the woman who had admitted without hesitation that she had considered selling it. Most people would have lied. She had chosen the harder truth. As dawn broke over Cleveland, Daniel unlocked the front door of his mother's house instead of driving to his office. The familiar scent of cedar and old books greeted him. He walked straight to the study. Few people had ever entered this room. It wasn't elegant. Just a small space lined with overflowing bookshelves, handwritten recipe cards, framed family photographs, and dozens of worn notebooks stacked neatly inside a glass cabinet. After Eleanor's funeral, Daniel had packed nothing away. He simply closed the door. For 3 years. Now, for the first time, he unlocked the cabinet. Dust floated through the morning sunlight as he lifted out the first notebook. Its cover simply read, Volunteer Journal, 2008. Daniel smiled faintly. Mom, what were you doing all these years? He opened the first page. Instead of detailed reports, Each entry contained only short notes. Room 312. Mr. Alvarez finally smiled today. Bring extra socks next Tuesday. Pray for little Emma before surgery. Mrs. Collins misses homemade soup. No last names. No recognition. No signatures. Just reminders to care for people. Daniel turned another page. Another. Then another. Every notebook looked the same. Year after year, small acts of kindness recorded with remarkable consistency. His mother had never mentioned any of it. She had never accepted awards, never posted photographs, never asked for praise. Daniel suddenly realized that while he had spent decades building hospitals through business, his mother had quietly built hope one conversation at a time. He reached the journal dated 2022, only months before her death. A folded photograph slipped onto the floor. He picked it up. It showed Eleanor standing beside an elderly woman in a hospital garden. Both women were laughing. Written on the back, in Eleanor's familiar handwriting, were the words, Helen Foster. Today she smiled for the first time in 6 months. Daniel frowned. The name stirred something in his memory. He continued reading. March 18th. Helen believes she has nothing left to give. She is wrong. Sometimes people only need someone to remind them who they still are. April 2nd. She asked about my ring again. Funny how people think valuable things should stay locked away. Daniel stopped reading. His pulse quickened. He turned the page. There was another entry. April 15th. If I ever leave before it's time, I hope the ring keeps traveling farther than I ever could. He stared at the sentence. Traveling. What did she mean? Another folded paper slipped from between the pages. It wasn't a letter, it was a list. Across the top, Eleanor had written, people who returned the ring below were names. Not many, only 6, each with a date. Each separated by several years. No explanations, just names. Helen Foster appeared third. Daniel's breathing slowed. The ring hadn't been missing only once. It had disappeared before, repeatedly. And every time, it had come back. He leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed. His entire family had believed Eleanor treasured the ring because it belonged to her grandmother. Perhaps that had once been true. But somewhere along the way, its meaning had changed. Around 9 o'clock, Daniel called Olivia. I won't be coming into the office. You have 3 board meetings. Cancel them. There was a brief silence. Is everything all right? I need you to find someone. Who? Helen Foster. Olivia typed quickly. There are a lot of Helen Fosters. She was connected to St. Matthew Medical Center about 3 years ago. I'll start searching. And Olivia? Yes. If she agrees to meet, I'll go personally. Less than 2 hours later, Olivia called back. I found her. Daniel sat upright. She's 81 now. Is she well? She lives in an assisted living community about 40 minutes outside Cleveland. Daniel closed the notebook carefully. Does she know my mother passed away? I don't think so. I'd like to tell her myself. Meanwhile, across town, Rebecca arrived at St. Matthew, feeling as though every pair of eyes followed her. News traveled quickly in hospitals. Not the details, just enough to spark whispers. She wasn't angry. People were curious. That was human nature. Marcus met her near the employee entrance. Morning. Morning. He handed her a visitor badge instead of her usual employee badge. Temporary procedure until everything's documented. Rebecca accepted it without complaint. I understand. Marcus hesitated. For what it's worth. She looked up. I read your personnel file this morning. Rebecca looked surprised. You've worked here almost 7 years. She nodded. You've never received a disciplinary warning. No? You've received 43 patient commendations. Rebecca smiled awkwardly. I didn't know anyone counted. Marcus chuckled. They do. He became serious again. I also spoke with Arthur Collins. Rebecca blinked. The jeweler, he confirmed everything, including the part where you walked away from $42,000. Rebecca lowered her eyes. I couldn't sell it. Marcus studied her for a moment. You know? What? My father used to tell me something. She waited. Integrity costs the most exactly when you can least afford it. Rebecca smiled softly. Your father sounds wise. He was. Before either of them could continue, Linda Chavez hurried down the hallway carrying a thick archive folder. Marcus! She sounded unusually excited. I found something. Both turned toward her. The original transfer documents. Marcus frowned. I thought they were incomplete. So did I. Linda opened the folder. A second packet was misfiled under another patient. She quickly flipped through the pages. There are handwritten notes attached. Rebecca stepped closer. Does it identify the owner? Linda's eyes widened as she reached the final page. No. She looked up slowly. It identifies someone named Helen Foster. Rebecca exchanged a glance with Marcus. The name meant nothing to her. But only a few miles away, Daniel Whitmore was already driving toward the very same woman carrying one of his mother's old journals on the passenger seat, and hoping that at last someone could explain why Eleanor Whitmore had spent years allowing her most precious possession to disappear into the lives of complete strangers. The Maple Grove Assisted Living Community stood on a quiet hill outside Cleveland, surrounded by maple trees, whose leaves had begun turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Daniel Whitmore arrived 10 minutes early. He remained in his car longer than necessary, staring at the leather-bound journal resting on the passenger seat. His mother's handwriting seemed strangely alive. If I ever leave before it's time, I hope the ring keeps traveling farther than I ever could. The sentence refused to leave his mind. Inside the residence, a receptionist greeted him warmly. Mrs. Helen Foster has been expecting you. Daniel looked surprised. She has? The woman smiled. When I told her your last name, she cried. A few moments later, Daniel stepped into a small sitting room overlooking the garden. An elderly woman with neatly combed white hair slowly rose from her chair using a wooden cane. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. You have Eleanor's eyes? She whispered. Daniel felt his throat tighten. You knew my mother well. Helen smiled through her emotion. Better than she ever admitted. She motioned toward the chair beside her. Sit down, Daniel. The way she spoke his name made him feel as though she had known him all his life. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel opened the journal. I found your name. Helen laughed softly. Then I suppose you found the truth your mother kept from everyone. I'm not sure I understand it. She nodded. Most people didn't. Daniel carefully removed a photograph from the journal. I also found this. Helen smiled the instant she saw it. Oh, that day. She insisted we take a picture because I finally laughed. Daniel leaned forward. Can you tell me about the ring? Helen became quiet. She looked toward the window where autumn leaves drifted across the courtyard. When I met your mother, I had already decided I was finished living. Daniel blinked. My husband had died. My daughter stopped speaking to me. I'd lost our home. I came to St. Matthew because my heart was failing. She smiled faintly. Not the kind doctors could fix. Daniel listened without interrupting. Your mother visited every Thursday. She never introduced herself as Mrs. Whitmore. Never mentioned money. Never told anyone her son owned half the medical companies in Ohio. Daniel lowered his eyes. That sounds like her. Helen chuckled. One afternoon I told her I had absolutely nothing left. She paused. I remember those exact words. Nothing left. Eleanor looked at me for a long time. Then she removed her ring. Daniel instinctively touched the empty space where the evidence case would normally have been. I asked why she was giving me something so precious. Helen smiled. She said, the elderly woman's voice softened, as though Eleanor herself were speaking. This ring isn't valuable because it's mine. It's valuable because every person who holds it has a chance to decide who they want to become. Daniel closed his eyes. Helen continued. I refused. 3 times. But Eleanor kept smiling. Finally, she told me one condition. What condition? Daniel asked. When your life becomes brighter than it is today. Helen looked directly at him. You must place the ring into the hands of someone who needs hope more than you do. Daniel felt chills run through him. So she intended... Yes. The ring was never meant to stay. She folded her weathered hands together. For almost a year I wore it. I found work again. My daughter forgave me. My grandchildren came back into my life. When I realized I smiled more than I cried, she laughed quietly. I knew it was time. Daniel leaned closer. What happened then? Helen's eyes sparkled. I met a young father in the oncology wing. He had sold everything to pay for his wife's treatment. He looked exactly the way I once looked. So I gave him the ring. Daniel sat speechless. And after that, I never saw it again. Weren't you worried? Helen shook her head. That would have meant I never understood Eleanor. Meanwhile, back at St. Matthew Medical Center, Rebecca had just finished helping Caleb eat lunch in his hospital room when Marcus knocked gently on the open door. You have a visitor? Rebecca looked confused. I do. Pastor Grace stepped inside carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. I thought you might need a break. Rebecca smiled gratefully. You always know. Grace handed her 1 cup. I heard about the transfer documents. So did I. They mentioned someone named Helen Foster. Rebecca nodded. I wish I knew what it meant. Pastor Grace looked thoughtfully toward the window. Sometimes answers arrive one person at a time. Rebecca sighed. I just hope Mr. Whitmore finds whatever he's looking for. Grace studied her carefully. You still call him Mr. Whitmore? Rebecca looked puzzled. Shouldn't I? He accused you of stealing. Rebecca stirred her coffee slowly. He lost the last thing that connected him to his mother. She shrugged gently. I probably would have reacted the same way. Grace smiled. That's a generous way to see it. Rebecca looked toward Caleb, who was peacefully coloring dinosaurs at the bedside table. My son watches everything I do. She spoke quietly. If I let bitterness decide who I become, she shook her head. I'd be teaching him the wrong lesson. At that exact moment, Daniel's phone rang inside Helen Foster's apartment. It was Linda Chavez from St. Matthew. Mr. Whitmore, she said excitedly. We found another handwritten note attached to the old transfer file. Daniel stood immediately. What does it say? Linda read carefully. If this ring reaches Rebecca, Clark, tell her she already knows what to do. Daniel's heart stopped. What? We checked it 3 times. The note mentions Rebecca Clark by name. Daniel stared at the journal in disbelief. Rebecca had never met his mother. Eleanor Whitmore had died 3 years earlier. Yet somehow, His mother's final handwritten note appeared to have been waiting specifically for the exhausted single mother who had found the ring. Daniel read the handwritten note again, then a third time. The words remained unchanged. If this ring reaches Rebecca Clark, tell her she already knows what to do. He looked from the paper to Helen Foster. This doesn't make any sense. Helen extended her hand. May I see it? Daniel carefully passed her the photocopy Linda had sent from the archived file. Helen adjusted her reading glasses and studied it for nearly a minute before slowly shaking her head. No, Daniel frowned. No, this isn't one of Eleanor's original notes. What do you mean? She tapped the bottom corner of the page. Your mother's handwriting is unmistakable. Daniel leaned closer. Helen pointed to the signature. Eleanor always signed her volunteer notes with only one initial, just the letter E. She pointed again. This is different. Daniel immediately noticed it. The note was signed with the full name Eleanor Whitmore. His mother had never done that. Helen looked up. This paper wasn't written when I knew her. Daniel's pulse steadied. So someone added it later. I believe so. Relief mixed with confusion. For a brief moment he had almost believed his mother had somehow predicted meeting Rebecca years after her own death. Instead, a more believable mystery had emerged. Who had written the note, and why mention Rebecca by name? Daniel immediately called Linda Chavez. Don't file that note as evidence yet. I haven't. I need to examine the original. There's something else, Linda added. The note wasn't attached to the medical record. It wasn't. It was folded inside another envelope. What envelope? One addressed to the hospital volunteer office. Daniel closed his eyes. Don't let anyone move it. I won't. I'll be there in 40 minutes. After ending the call, he turned back toward Helen. I think someone continued my mother's work after she died. Helen smiled knowingly. I wouldn't be surprised. Eleanor had a way of changing people. Daniel looked at the old woman. Did she ever tell you why she chose the ring? Helen laughed softly. Oh, yes. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and carefully unfolded a faded photograph. The picture showed Eleanor sitting in the hospital chapel years earlier. Around her sat 5 people of different ages: a young soldier, an elderly woman, a teenage girl, a middle-aged construction worker, and Helen. Each of them smiled warmly. Helen touched the photograph gently. We all held the ring at one point. Daniel looked closer. My mother gathered everyone together. Every Christmas. What for? To remind us. Helen's voice softened. She used to say that kindness becomes fragile when people believe they own it. Daniel remained silent. So every person who once carried the ring returned to encourage the next. Exactly. And eventually, the ring moved forward again. Daniel finally understood. The ring wasn't a reward. It was a responsibility. Back at St. Matthew Medical Center, Rebecca finished her afternoon shift before returning to Caleb's room. She found him awake building a tiny city from plastic cups and unopened pudding containers. What are we making? She asked. A hospital. It already is one. He grinned. This one's better. Why? In my hospital. He carefully placed another cup beside the others. Nobody eats alone. Rebecca smiled. I like your hospital. He looked up at her. When I grow up, I want to help kids who are scared. You will. Like you do. She kissed the top of his head. I hope even better. Before Caleb could answer, Dr. Samuel Brooks entered, carrying a tablet. I have good news. Rebecca immediately stood. The latest scans look stable. She exhaled deeply. So surgery stays on schedule. It does. Relief washed across her face. Then Dr. Brooks hesitated. There is one concern. Rebecca's smile faded. The surgical team needs one additional imaging procedure. Is it urgent? Within 48 hours. She nodded. Whatever he needs. After the doctor left, Rebecca quietly opened her notebook again. Every new test meant another bill. She no longer reacted with panic, only calculation. That evening, while Caleb slept, Pastor Grace found Rebecca sitting beside the chapel window instead of inside the sanctuary. You've been avoiding the chapel? Rebecca smiled weakly. I wasn't sure I belonged there after everything. Grace sat beside her. That room doesn't belong to people who've never been misunderstood. Rebecca looked toward the stained glass window. I keep replaying that night. You mean when Daniel confronted you? Rebecca nodded. I saw so much pain in his face. Grace watched people crossing the courtyard below. Pain often introduces itself as anger. Rebecca thought quietly. I hope he finds peace. Grace smiled. And what about you? Rebecca looked surprised. I'll be all right. That's not what I asked. Rebecca didn't answer. The truth was she hadn't thought about herself in a very long time. Her entire world revolved around Caleb, keeping him breathing, keeping him hopeful, keeping tomorrow possible. Across the city, Daniel arrived at the hospital archives. Linda met him carrying a small, acid-free storage box. This is everything. Inside lay the mysterious envelope, the additional note, and several volunteer records overlooked during previous cataloging. Daniel carefully unfolded the envelope. Across the front, in neat handwriting, appeared only 4 words: To whoever finds hope. His heartbeat quickened. Inside was another letter, this one unmistakably written by Eleanor. The ink had faded slightly with age. The first sentence read, If you are reading this, then the ring has already reached another kind heart. Daniel slowly sat down. For the first time since his mother's death, he felt as though she were speaking directly into the silence she had left behind. Wednesday morning began with an email that carried the subject line, Maple Court Redevelopment, Final Board Review. William Harper stared at the screen for several seconds before closing his laptop. For nearly 3 decades, meetings like this had followed a familiar pattern. Analysts presented projections, executives debated risks, lawyers reviewed contracts, the board voted. By lunchtime, decisions affecting hundreds of lives were often reduced to signatures on neatly organized documents. Today no longer felt familiar. At 10 o'clock, the boardroom on the 21st floor filled with executives, legal advisors, and department heads. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Chicago, where the skyline shimmered beneath a pale winter sun. Ethan Harper arrived last. Unlike his father, Ethan wore confidence almost as naturally as his tailored navy suit. He greeted everyone quickly before placing a sleek tablet on the polished conference table. Good morning, he said. I think today's numbers speak for themselves. The lights dimmed. A presentation appeared on the large screen. Projected revenue increase 43%. Luxury occupancy, forecast 96%. Construction timeline 14 months. Investor confidence rating. Excellent. Everything looked impressive. Everything looked profitable. Ethan clicked to the next slide. Maple Court currently occupies valuable land significantly below market potential. Redevelopment would generate long-term growth while strengthening our urban portfolio. Several board members nodded. One asked, resident relocation costs, already included. Legal exposure, minimal. Another executive smiled. It seems straightforward. William remained silent. Ethan continued. We've also identified nearby rental options for existing tenants. William finally spoke. How many of those options cost more than Maple Court? The room grew quiet. Ethan glanced at another slide. Most of them. How much more? Depending on unit size, between 30 and 60%. William folded his hands. And how many current residents can realistically absorb that increase? Ethan hesitated. Our responsibility is to shareholders. Our responsibility, William replied calmly, is larger than that. The sentence surprised several people around the table. Ethan leaned forward. Dad, we've discussed this. No, William answered. We've discussed numbers. The room became noticeably tense. Ethan took a slow breath. Maple Court is an aging property. Yes. It requires significant investment. Yes. It no longer meets market expectations. William nodded. I agree. Relief briefly crossed Ethan's face. Then William continued. But markets aren't the only thing we're responsible for. Silence returned. One board member adjusted his glasses. William, are you suggesting canceling the redevelopment? I'm suggesting we redefine it. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? It means improving people's homes without destroying their community. Several executives exchanged uncertain looks. The chief financial officer spoke carefully. That approach would reduce projected profits. It would. Significantly. William nodded again. I know. Ethan closed his tablet. Dad, with respect, you're making this personal. William looked directly at his son. It became personal the moment I realized I had stopped seeing people. No one interrupted. Ethan had never heard his father speak that way during a business meeting. He tried another approach. You've always taught me that emotions can't guide investment. William smiled faintly. I taught you something incomplete. The room remained silent enough to hear the heating system hum overhead. William stood and walked toward the window. When your grandmother took me in? Several board members looked surprised. William almost never spoke about his childhood. She worked nights cleaning office buildings. He turned back toward the room. She rented apartments very much like Maple Court. Ethan listened quietly. Every month she worried about rent. William paused. I built this company because I promised her one day families like ours would have decent places to live. His voice remained steady. Somewhere along the way, I became very good at building properties. He looked down briefly. I'm no longer sure I've been equally good at protecting homes. No one spoke. The words carried more weight than any presentation slide. Across the city, Stephanie Sanchez had no idea this conversation was happening. She was on her knees polishing the hallway floor outside the pediatric intensive care unit. A little girl walked past holding an IV pole almost taller than herself. Stephanie smiled warmly. I like your purple socks. The child grinned. They're lucky socks. I believe you. After the girl disappeared around the corner, Nurse Angela approached. You've been smiling more? Have I? Angela nodded. Have you decided? Stephanie looked at the bucket of clean water beside her. Not completely. You keep saying that. I'm still scared. Angela leaned against the wall. Do you know what courage actually is? Stephanie shrugged. Being fearless. Angela smiled. No. It's being afraid and showing up anyway. Stephanie considered that. Meanwhile, back in the boardroom, the debate had continued for nearly an hour. Charts were replaced by legal documents. Legal documents gave way to budget estimates. Finally, Ethan spoke again. If we don't move forward with the current proposal, investors will ask why. William answered quietly. Then we'll tell them the truth. And what's that? That profitable buildings are easy to create. He looked around the room. Communities aren't. The sentence lingered long after he finished speaking. By the end of the meeting, no vote had been taken. For the first time in company history, William postponed a redevelopment decision after requesting an entirely new proposal. One requirement was written in bold letters across the top of the revised planning document. Resident participation required before final approval. As executives slowly left the boardroom, Ethan remained behind. When the room finally emptied, he closed the door. I don't recognize you anymore, he admitted. William looked at his son with gentle sadness. I don't recognize the man I was 6 months ago either. Ethan sighed. Did one subway ride really change all this? William reached into his jacket pocket. He unfolded the worn $20 bill one more time. No, he smiled softly. One woman reminded me who I had promised never to become. Hundreds of blocks away, Stephanie zipped up her winter coat after finishing another exhausting shift. She still hadn't given William an answer. She believed the biggest decision of her week was whether to accept a volunteer role helping her neighbors. She couldn't possibly know that at that very moment, one of Chicago's most powerful companies had already begun changing because of a decision she had made with nothing more than $20 a blue notebook and the simple courage to believe a stranger. Friday evening arrived with the first clear sunset Chicago had seen in nearly a week. The golden light reflected off the windows of Maple Court Apartments, making the aging brick building look almost new for a few precious minutes. Stephanie Sanchez stood beside the mailbox cluster with a reusable grocery bag in one hand and Lucas's small backpack in the other. Inside the backpack was a permission slip for a school field trip. The fee was $18. She had already calculated 3 different ways to make it work. Mom, Lucas tugged gently at her sleeve. Can we stop by Mrs. Evelyn's first? Of course. I want to show her my science project. They had barely taken a few steps when a familiar gray SUV slowly entered the parking lot. It stopped near the maple tree. William Harper stepped out alone. No security, no assistance, only a thick folder tucked beneath one arm. Several residents noticed him immediately. Conversations grew quieter. Mrs. Evelyn emerged from her apartment holding a casserole dish. Leonard Hayes paused while repairing a porch railing. Children stopped riding their bicycles. William looked around before speaking. I hope I'm not interrupting dinner. Mrs. Evelyn smiled. You're about 10 minutes early. A few people laughed softly. The tension eased. William nodded towards the community room. If everyone has a little time, I'd like to share something. Within 15 minutes, nearly 30 residents had gathered. The room looked different than it had during the first meeting. People still carried uncertainty, but now curiosity had replaced much of the fear. Stephanie chose a seat near the back. She preferred listening. William remained standing. I asked all of you for patience. He looked around the room slowly. Today I'd like to offer something more useful. He opened the folder. I've rejected the original redevelopment proposal. The room fell completely silent. Someone whispered, What? William continued, Maple Court will not be demolished. For several seconds, nobody reacted. It was as though the words needed time to become believable. Then, Mrs. Evelyn covered her mouth. Leonard quietly lowered his head. A young mother began crying without making a sound. Relief spread through the room almost visibly. William raised one hand gently. This doesn't mean nothing will change. He unfolded a large site map. The buildings still need major repairs. Residents leaned forward. We'll replace plumbing, repair heating systems, modernize electrical wiring, improve accessibility, and renovate every apartment. One father raised his hand. Where do we live during construction? William smiled. Here. Confused expressions filled the room. We'll renovate one section at a time. Families will temporarily move into available apartments within Maple Court while their own units are being updated. Stephanie immediately understood. No one would lose the neighborhood. No child would need to change schools. No elderly resident would lose familiar faces. William continued. It will cost significantly more. A man near the front asked, Then why do it? William looked around the room. Because after walking through this community, I realized I wasn't investing in buildings. He paused. I was responsible for people. Silence settled again. This time it felt warm. Then William took a deep breath. There is one more announcement. His eyes found Stephanie. She felt every head in the room slowly turn toward her. I've decided that no future decisions about Maple Court will be made without resident participation. He looked directly at Stephanie. I've asked someone to lead our new Community Advisory Council. Stephanie's heartbeat quickened. William continued calmly. Stephanie Sanchez. She immediately shook her head. I haven't accepted. William smiled. I know. Several neighbors looked surprised. Mrs. Evelyn looked delighted. Leonard grinned quietly. William addressed everyone. I wanted all of you to hear this before she answered. Stephanie slowly stood. I don't think I'm the right person. A woman near the second row spoke before anyone else could. Why not? Stephanie looked around. I've never done anything like this. Leonard chuckled. Neither had I before fixing everyone's bicycles. Laughter rippled through the room. Mrs. Evelyn added gently, You already spend half your life helping this building. Another resident spoke. You actually listen. A father nodded. You remember our names? The young nursing student Stephanie had met during the first meeting smiled. When my daughter was sick, you brought soup. I never forgot that. One voice became another. You helped carry groceries. You translated forms for my mother. You shoveled snow. Wui. You checked on my husband after surgery. Stephanie hadn't realized how many ordinary moments other people remembered. To her, they had never seemed important. William waited quietly. He wasn't trying to persuade her anymore. The community was speaking instead. Lucas finally raised his small hand. Everyone smiled. William nodded. Go ahead. Lucas looked at his mother. You always tell me that if we can help, we should. Stephanie laughed softly. I did say that. So, he shrugged with complete sincerity. Why are you saying no? The room erupted in gentle laughter. Stephanie covered her face for a second, embarrassed. You make that sound very simple. Lucas smiled. Maybe it is. She looked around once more. Not at William. At the people. Mrs. Evelyn, Leonard, the young families, children she had watched grow taller every year. This wasn't just an apartment complex. It was the closest thing Lucas had ever known to an extended family. She took one slow breath. If I accept, the room became quiet again. I need everyone to understand something. People listened carefully. I don't want this position unless every resident can speak honestly, even if you disagree with me. Heads nodded. I won't make promises I can't keep. More nods. And I won't stop working at the hospital. William looked surprised. You don't have to. I know. Stephanie smiled. But I want Lucas to see that serving your community doesn't mean forgetting where you came from. William's expression softened. I wouldn't ask you to leave. She looked toward him. Then, she smiled nervously. I'll do it. The applause began almost immediately. Not loud, not dramatic, just heartfelt. Mrs. Evelyn hugged her first. Leonard shook her hand. Several children clapped without fully understanding why the adults looked so emotional. William waited until everyone settled down. There will be one more change. He held up the revised project plan. Every contractor hired here will first interview qualified residents for available jobs. The room buzzed with surprise. We're not just repairing apartments, William said. We're investing in the people who already call this place home. Stephanie looked at him with quiet admiration. She suddenly understood. The greatest gift William had offered wasn't a title. It wasn't money. It wasn't influence. It was trust. And trust, once shared, had a remarkable way of spreading through an entire community. As the meeting ended and neighbors lingered to talk beneath the warm lights of the community room, no one noticed William quietly slipping the folded $20 bill back into his wallet. For the first time since that night on the Blue Line, he no longer carried it as a debt he needed to repay. He carried it as a promise he intended to keep. The first renovation began on a rainy Monday in early March. Instead of bulldozers arriving at sunrise, 2 moving trucks quietly rolled into the Maple Court parking lot, carrying empty boxes, protective blankets, and temporary storage bins. There were no eviction notices taped to apartment doors. No families dragging furniture onto sidewalks. No police officers standing by to enforce deadlines. Instead, residents helped one another carry lamps, family photographs, children's toys, and kitchen tables from one building to another. Stephanie Sanchez walked through the courtyard wearing jeans work boots and a bright yellow safety vest with a simple badge clipped to the front. Community Coordinator. She smiled every time she looked at it, not because it made her feel important, because it reminded her that someone had trusted her. She still worked the overnight shift at St. Mary's Medical Center 4 nights each week. That hadn't changed. Her mornings belonged to the hospital. Her afternoons belonged to Maple Court. Sleep had become something she collected in small pieces. Yet she had never felt more energized. She carried a clipboard filled with apartment numbers, medical notes, moving schedules, and handwritten reminders. Apartment 1A, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks. Temporary apartment ready. Remember oxygen machine. Apartment 2C. New baby. Move crib first. Apartment 3F. Mr. Leonard Hayes. Protect toolbox. Nothing on her list spoke about profit margins. Everything spoke about people. As movers arrived at Mrs. Evelyn's apartment, the elderly woman looked nervously around her living room. I've lived with these walls longer than some marriages last. Stephanie smiled. We're only borrowing another apartment for a little while. Mrs. Evelyn gently touched the photograph of her late husband. I'm afraid something will disappear. It won't. Stephanie carefully wrapped the framed picture herself before placing it into a padded box. I'll carry this one. Mrs. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. You always know what matters most. Stephanie thought of the blue notebook waiting at home in her kitchen drawer. Sometimes the most valuable things in a person's life couldn't be measured by money. Across the courtyard, Lucas had appointed himself the official welcoming committee. Each family arriving at a temporary apartment received one of his handmade maps. He had drawn every building using colored pencils. Large arrows pointed toward the laundry room, playground mailboxes, and Mrs. Evelyn's apartment. At the bottom of every map he had written, "You're still home." The construction workers loved them. One electrician folded his map carefully into his lunchbox instead of throwing it away. "You've got a good kid," he told Stephanie. She smiled. "He teaches me almost as much as I teach him." William Harper visited the site every afternoon, not to inspect construction, to inspect conversations. He noticed which workers greeted residents politely. He noticed who listened patiently when elderly tenants asked questions. When one subcontractor complained that residents were slowing everything down, William quietly pulled him aside. "If people are inconvenient," William said calmly, "you're working on the wrong project." The subcontractor apologized. Word spread quickly. This renovation would be different. Meanwhile, Richard Collins watched everything from his office window. Although he had not been dismissed from the company, William had removed him from daily management of Maple Court, while an internal review continued. Richard rarely spoke anymore. He simply watched Stephanie move confidently through the property. The residents greeted her by name. Construction supervisors consulted her before making schedule changes. Even William asked for her opinion before approving modifications. Richard struggled to understand. She had no business degree, no management certificate, no executive experience. Yet somehow people trusted her more than they had trusted him after nearly 10 years. He couldn't decide whether that frustrated him or embarrassed him. One afternoon, Stephanie received an unexpected phone call while helping a family unpack dishes. "Mrs. Sanchez. This is Stephanie. This is Principal Diane Foster from Lincoln Elementary." Stephanie immediately worried about Lucas. "Is everything all right?" "Oh, yes." The principal laughed gently. "I actually wanted to tell you something wonderful." Stephanie relaxed. "What happened?" "Lucas gave his field trip lunch to another student today." Stephanie closed her eyes for a moment. Of course he had. "The other boy forgot his lunch," the principal continued. "When we asked Lucas why he did it, he said..." There was a brief pause. "My mom says hungry people shouldn't have to explain themselves first." Stephanie felt tears gathering unexpectedly. She had no memory of saying those exact words. Perhaps she had. Or perhaps Lucas had simply understood the meaning behind everything she tried to teach him. "Thank you for calling," she whispered. After hanging up, she remained still for several moments. William happened to be walking across the courtyard. "Good news?" he asked. Stephanie smiled through damp eyes. "The best kind." Later that evening, residents gathered in the community room for the first advisory council meeting. Instead of speeches, Stephanie placed a large sheet of paper on the wall. Across the top, she wrote, "What would make Maple Court feel more like home?" People hesitated at first. Then one resident stood and wrote, "Better lighting near Building C." Another added, "A reading corner for kids." Someone suggested benches beneath the maple tree. A grandmother asked for raised garden beds she could reach without kneeling. Teenagers requested a basketball hoop with a proper net. No one talked about luxury finishes. No one asked for marble countertops. Their dreams were surprisingly ordinary. Safe, warm, shared. William quietly read every suggestion. He leaned toward Stephanie. "These improvements cost much less than the features our consultants recommended." She smiled. "That's because consultants don't usually ask children where they'd like to read books." He laughed softly. "No." They usually don't. As the meeting ended, Lucas walked over, carrying the blue notebook Stephanie had accidentally left on the refreshment table. "You forgot this." She accepted it with a smile. William noticed the familiar worn cover immediately. He recognized the stretched elastic band, the softened corners, the notebook that had once held a single folded $20 bill. Stephanie tucked it carefully into her bag. Some objects became precious, not because of what they contained, but because of the choices they had witnessed. Outside, the first tiny green leaves had begun appearing on the maple tree. Spring was arriving, slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed, much like the changes taking place inside every person who called Maple Court home. By the middle of April, Maple Court looked like two neighborhoods living side by side. One half echoed with the sounds of construction hammers striking wood drills, humming behind temporary walls, and workers carrying fresh sheets of drywall through hallways that smelled of new paint. The other half carried on with ordinary life. Children raced their bicycles between orange safety cones. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks watered the first tulips that had finally bloomed beneath the maple tree. Leonard Hayes had turned an unused storage room into a small repair corner where neighbors left broken lamps, squeaky cabinet doors, and wobbly chairs. Life had not stopped. It had simply learned to move around change. Stephanie Sanchez walked through the courtyard with her clipboard tucked beneath one arm, greeting nearly everyone by name. She had developed a habit over the past month. Every morning before reviewing schedules, she knocked on 3 apartment doors at random, not because something was wrong, simply to ask, "How are you doing today?" People had begun expecting those visits. Sometimes they needed help. Sometimes they only needed someone willing to listen. William Harper often watched those conversations from a distance. He had attended dozens of leadership seminars throughout his career. None of them had ever suggested knocking on random apartment doors, yet it was accomplishing more than any corporate strategy he had ever approved. Late one Thursday afternoon, Stephanie noticed someone sitting alone near the bus stop across from Maple Court. A young man, perhaps 26. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt and held a thin black folder on his lap. His shoulders were slumped forward. He stared at the sidewalk without moving. She recognized him immediately. Marcus Reed. He had lived in Building B for less than a year. Usually he smiled whenever they crossed paths. Today he didn't even notice her. Stephanie crossed the street. "Marcus?" He looked up quickly, embarrassed. "Oh, hi. You all right?" He forced a smile that disappeared almost instantly. "I'm fine." She sat on the empty bench beside him. "No." He looked away. "I'm really not." For several moments, they simply watched traffic pass. Eventually, Marcus spoke. "I had an interview this morning." "How did it go?" "I never made it." Stephanie frowned. "My car finally died." "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "That wasn't the worst part." He looked down at the folder. "I spent everything paying rent after my hours were cut." His voice grew quieter. "I have another interview tomorrow." "That's good." "It is." He swallowed hard. "Except I don't have enough money to get there." Stephanie understood immediately. Bus fare, train transfers, maybe lunch. Sometimes opportunity cost less than $20. Sometimes even that felt impossible. Marcus laughed bitterly. "I've been walking around all afternoon trying to convince myself it isn't a big deal." He looked toward the city skyline. "But it is." Stephanie didn't answer. Instead, she slowly opened the familiar blue notebook she carried everywhere. Its pages were fuller now. Meeting notes, repair requests, residents' phone numbers, volunteer schedules. Near the back, tucked inside the elastic band, rested a single folded $20 bill. She had placed it there weeks earlier after finally repaying Nurse Angela. Not as emergency money, as a reminder. She looked at it quietly. Money can wait. People can't. Her mother's words returned exactly as they always did. Marcus noticed the notebook. I can't ask you. You're not asking. I know things have been hard for you, too. Stephanie smiled gently. They've gotten better. He shook his head. I'll pay you back. She almost laughed. I've heard that before. He looked confused. Without another word, she removed the folded $20 bill and placed it carefully inside his interview folder. Marcus immediately reached for it. No, I can't. You can. This is too much. It's exactly enough. His eyes filled. I don't deserve this. Stephanie remembered another subway ride, another stranger, another person who had believed the very same thing. She smiled softly. Sometimes people don't need to deserve kindness. They just need it. Marcus lowered his head. For a long moment he couldn't speak. Across the street, William Harper had just stepped out of his SUV after returning from another meeting downtown. He noticed Stephanie sitting at the bus stop. Curious, he remained where he was. He watched the conversation from a respectful distance. He couldn't hear the words, only the gestures, the familiar blue notebook opening, the folded bill changing hands, Marcus trying to refuse, Stephanie insisting. William stood perfectly still. The memory struck him instantly. Different season, different bench, same $20, same quiet determination. The only difference was that this time he wasn't the one receiving hope. Marcus finally stood. I'll bring this back. Stephanie smiled. If you do, she paused, I hope you're bringing it back because someone else needs it. He stared at her, then slowly nodded. I understand. No? She smiled more warmly. You will. Marcus walked away, clutching the folder tightly against his chest. William waited until he disappeared around the corner before approaching. You did it again. Stephanie turned and laughed softly. I suppose I did. He looked toward the street where Marcus had vanished. Was that the same $20? She nodded. It seemed wrong to spend it on groceries. So you gave it away. I loaned it to Hope. William smiled. I like that. They began walking slowly toward the courtyard. You know, William said quietly, for weeks I've been wondering whether I should frame the bill you gave me. Stephanie looked amused. And now, I think I'd rather keep it moving. She nodded. I think that's what my mother would have wanted. As they reached the maple tree, children were drawing colorful chalk pictures along the sidewalk. Lucas looked up excitedly. Mom. He pointed toward the flower bed. The tulips planted weeks earlier were now in full bloom, bright red, brilliant yellow, deep purple. Mrs. Evelyn smiled proudly. I told you spring would come. Stephanie looked at the flowers, then toward the street where Marcus had disappeared. Some gifts bloomed in gardens, others bloomed inside people. Both simply needed someone willing to plant the first seed. And somewhere across Chicago, a young man carrying a black interview folder stepped onto a bus with exactly enough money to reach an opportunity that might change the rest of his life. He still believed someone had saved him. He had no idea he was already becoming part of something much larger, a circle of kindness that refused to end where it began. The first warm Saturday of May brought something Maple Court had not seen in years. Every window was open. Children's laughter drifted through the courtyard. Someone played old Motown songs from a second-floor balcony. Fresh mulch had been spread around the flower beds, and the maple tree, once bare and forgotten, now cast a wide canopy of green over the benches below. Construction was nearly complete. The buildings looked cleaner. The hallways were brighter. The broken security gate had been replaced. New ramps made every entrance accessible. Yet William Harper noticed that the compliments he overheard rarely focused on the renovations. People talked about neighbors, about the community dinners, about children playing outside again, about feeling safe. It was exactly what his consultants had failed to predict. That afternoon, Stephanie Sanchez was organizing donated books inside the new reading corner the residents had requested. Lucas and 3 other children sorted them by color instead of alphabet. Stephanie almost corrected them before deciding the rainbow shelves looked happier anyway. William appeared quietly in the doorway. "I was hoping I'd find you here." Stephanie smiled. "You usually do." He looked around the room. Fresh paint covered the walls. Soft lamps had replaced the harsh fluorescent lights. Small chairs circled a colorful rug where children were already reading picture books. "I almost approved an espresso bar for this room," William admitted. Stephanie laughed. "The children probably would have preferred hot chocolate." They definitely would have. For a few moments, they simply watched Lucas helping a younger girl sound out difficult words. William spoke again. "I've been meaning to tell you something." Stephanie sensed the seriousness in his voice. They stepped outside beneath the maple tree, where a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers through the courtyard. William reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Stephanie immediately recognized what he was holding: the folded $20 bill. Its edges had become softer over the months. "I still carry it." "I know." "I've decided not to frame it." She smiled. "I'm glad." He unfolded the bill carefully. "There was something I never told you." Stephanie waited. "The day we met," he looked toward the children playing nearby, "I wasn't only grieving my mother." He paused before continuing. "My board had approved the first version of the Maple Court redevelopment that same morning." Stephanie looked at him quietly. "I signed the preliminary authorization." She said nothing. "I told myself it was business." His voice grew softer. "I never visited the property." "You trusted the reports." "I trusted convenience." The words seemed difficult to say. "I convinced myself that responsibility ended when the paperwork was complete." Stephanie studied the bill in his hand. "But then the subway happened." William nodded slowly. "When you gave me this." He held up the $20 bill. "I realized something that has haunted me ever since." "What was that?" "You had every reason to protect yourself." He smiled sadly. "You knew nothing about me." "I knew enough." "What did you know?" Stephanie looked toward Lucas. "I knew someone was hurting." Silence settled between them. William lowered his eyes. "The next week I asked our accounting department to calculate how much your $20 represented." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "They estimated your hourly wage after taxes." Stephanie began to understand. "It was nearly 2 hours of your work." He nodded. "You gave me almost 2 hours of your life." She had never thought about it that way. Neither had he until recently. "I've signed checks worth millions," William continued. "None of them have ever felt as valuable as this." Stephanie smiled gently. "Because money wasn't what I gave you." He looked at her. "What did you give me?" "A chance to remember who raised you." William's eyes glistened. He laughed quietly. "That's exactly what happened." They sat together on one of the new benches beneath the maple tree. Children chased bubbles across the courtyard. Mrs. Evelyn chatted with Leonard while watering the flower beds. Everything felt peaceful. "I completed the internal investigation," William finally said. Stephanie turned toward him. "Richard?" William nodded. "He wasn't stealing money?" "I didn't think he was." "No." William sighed. "He simply stopped seeing people." Stephanie remained thoughtful. "He treated residents like maintenance requests." William nodded. "He ignored complaints, delayed repairs, and filtered information before it reached our office." "What happened?" "I offered him a choice." She waited. "Retire quietly." He paused. "Or stay with the company after completing community engagement training and working directly with residents for a year." Stephanie looked surprised. "You didn't fire him?" "I almost did." "Why didn't you—" William watched Richard in the distance. For the first time in months, the former property manager was helping a volunteer install new bulletin boards. "He forgot something." Stephanie nodded. "So did you?" William smiled. "Exactly. If people deserve second chances," she looked toward the children, "someone has to be willing to offer the first one." William laughed softly. "I think you're becoming more dangerous than any business consultant I've ever hired." "How so?" "You keep changing policies." That wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. Within weeks, Harper Residential Properties had introduced new rules across every apartment complex they owned. Every property would establish a resident advisory council. Executives would spend one day each month visiting communities without advance notice. Repair requests involving elderly or disabled residents would receive priority. Community rooms could never again be converted into rentable office space. Many shareholders questioned the decisions. Several investors complained. Others applauded. Surprisingly, employee satisfaction also began increasing. Maintenance workers reported fewer conflicts. Residents renewed leases more often. Vacancies declined. Compassion, it turned out, was not bad business. It simply required patience. As the sun slowly began setting, Lucas ran toward his mother holding a folded sheet of paper. "I finished my school essay." Stephanie smiled. "Can I read it?" He handed it to her proudly. The title read, "The Richest Person I Know." William chuckled. "I hope it isn't me." Lucas grinned. "It isn't." Stephanie began reading. The essay described a person who always had enough kindness to share, even when money was tight. Someone who believed strangers mattered. Someone who taught that home was built by people instead of walls. At the bottom, in large, uneven handwriting, Lucas had written, "My mom says money can wait, but people can't. I think that makes her richer than anybody." Stephanie looked away for a moment, overwhelmed. William quietly folded the $20 bill once again before returning it to his wallet. For the first time, he no longer carried it to remember one extraordinary act of kindness. He carried it because it reminded him that true wealth was measured not by what remained in your account at the end of the month, but by what remained in another person's heart after you walked away. Summer arrived at Maple Court with the scent of fresh-cut grass and the sound of children who no longer hurried inside before sunset. 6 months earlier, the courtyard had been filled with uncertainty. Now folding tables stretched beneath the maple tree covered with homemade food lemonade, pictures, paper plates, and photographs documenting the renovation from beginning to end. Someone had hung a banner that simply read, "Welcome Home." Stephanie Sanchez smiled when she saw it, not because the words were beautiful, because no one had written, "Welcome back." No one had ever truly left. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks sat in her favorite chair beneath the maple tree, proudly showing visitors the tulips that had grown taller than anyone expected. Leonard Hayes had organized a bicycle safety course for neighborhood children. The reading corner inside the community room was so full every afternoon that volunteers had started collecting more books from local libraries. The courtyard looked different, but somehow it still felt exactly the same. William Harper stood quietly near the edge of the gathering, watching people laugh together. Months earlier, he would have measured success by occupancy rates, renovation costs, and investor reports. Today, his eyes searched for something entirely different. Neighbors talking, children playing, people who looked as though tomorrow belonged to them. Ethan Harper walked across the courtyard carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to his father. "I owe you an apology." William looked surprised. "For what? I thought you were throwing away profit." William smiled. "And now," Ethan glanced around, "I've spent the last month visiting our other properties." He paused. "The ones with resident councils have fewer complaints." William nodded. "I noticed. They also have lower turnover." "Yes." Ethan laughed softly. "I've been trying to explain that to investors. And they understand numbers." William looked toward Stephanie, helping a young mother carry folding chairs. "They'll understand this eventually." Ethan followed his father's gaze. "I met Stephanie yesterday." William smiled. "I heard. She gave me a list." "A list?" 37 ideas from residents." William chuckled. "Only 37. The funny thing is," Ethan shook his head, "none of them were expensive. No, they just wanted someone to listen." William placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's usually where every real solution begins." Across the courtyard, Lucas ran toward his mother carrying another drawing. "I'm finished," Stephanie laughed. "Already?" He nodded enthusiastically. This drawing looked different from all the others. Months ago he had drawn apartment buildings. Today he had drawn people. Mrs. Evelyn holding flowers, Leonard repairing a bicycle, children reading books, construction workers eating lunch beside residents, William sitting beneath the maple tree. Stephanie noticed something missing. "There isn't a building." Lucas smiled. "I didn't need one." She looked at him curiously. "Why not?" "Because everyone already knows where they live." Stephanie hugged him tightly. "You've gotten very wise." "I learned from you." A microphone squealed gently near the refreshment table. Mrs. Evelyn slowly stood. "I'd like everyone's attention for just a minute." The conversations quieted. She looked around the courtyard with misty eyes. "When my Harold planted this maple tree," she rested one hand against its rough trunk, "he told me trees don't grow because someone watches them every day." People listened quietly. "They grow because someone cared enough to plant them." She smiled toward Stephanie. "I think people are a lot like trees." Applause spread softly through the crowd. Mrs. Evelyn wasn't finished. "I also think someone deserves a thank you." She turned toward Stephanie. Before Stephanie realized what was happening, every resident had begun clapping. Some stood. Others wiped away tears. Stephanie immediately shook her head. "No!" She laughed through embarrassed tears. "It wasn't just me." Leonard spoke first. "You knocked on our doors." A young mother added, "You remembered our names." The nursing student smiled. "You made us believe we belonged." Marcus Reed stepped forward from the crowd. Stephanie blinked. She had not seen him in weeks. He looked different, healthier, more confident. He wore a company polo embroidered with the logo of a transportation engineering firm. "I got the job." Stephanie's face lit up. "I knew you would." Marcus smiled. It gets better. He reached into his wallet, carefully, slowly. He removed a folded $20 bill. The crowd watched curiously. I've been carrying this since my first paycheck. Stephanie laughed. You kept it. I almost spent it 100 times. He looked around the courtyard. Yesterday, a new employee couldn't afford gas to make it home. He smiled. So, he handed the folded bill to the young man standing beside him. I figured it wasn't mine anymore. The young employee stared at the money in disbelief. I'll pay you back. Marcus smiled exactly the way Stephanie once had. I hope you don't. William quietly looked away for a moment. The circle had completed itself. Not because the same bill had returned, because the same kindness had. Later that evening, as the celebration slowly came to an end, William walked over to Stephanie. I have something for you. He handed her a small box. Inside rested a brand new blue notebook. Its cover looked almost identical to the worn one she had carried for years, only the pages were blank. Stephanie smiled. You remembered. I'll never forget. She opened the first page. Written neatly in William's handwriting were only 7 words. Money can wait, people can't. She closed the notebook gently. My old one is full. William nodded. I thought it might be time for another chapter. As the sun disappeared behind the Chicago skyline, Lucas slipped one folded $20 bill into the elastic band of the new notebook. Stephanie looked at him. What are you doing? He smiled. Leaving room for somebody else's story. She wrapped one arm around his shoulders. Together they stood beneath the maple tree as neighbors slowly walked home. The building around them was stronger than it had ever been. But the greatest renovation had never happened inside brick walls or freshly painted apartments. It had happened inside people who had learned that the smallest act of kindness could become the foundation for an entire community. Life has a quiet way of testing our character when no one is watching. It rarely asks what we own, how successful we are, or what title appears on our business card. Instead, it asks a much simpler question. What will you do when someone else is hurting? Stephanie never imagined that $20 could change her life. In truth, it wasn't the money that transformed anything. It was the decision to see a human being when everyone else saw an inconvenience. That single moment reminded William of the values he had buried beneath years of business decisions. It inspired Marcus to help another stranger. It taught Lucas that generosity is measured by sacrifice, not abundance. And it helped an entire neighborhood discover that lasting change begins when ordinary people choose to care for one another. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: kindness is never truly spent. It travels from one heart to another, often in ways we never witness. The help you offer today may become the hope someone else passes forward years from now. You may never see the full circle, but that doesn't make it any less real. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Have you ever experienced a small act of kindness that changed your life? Share your story so others can be encouraged by it. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories that remind us of the good still found in ordinary people, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next journey.